you all the scoop, honey. Brendan Paul just got off the stand about 20 minutes ago, and I thought he was really gonna go in on Diddy, drag Diddy, just drop all of the dirt, spill all of the tea, but he actually didn't really do too much damage to Diddy, in my opinion. And Brian still went lightly on him during the cross-examination, and of course he did, because Brandon didn't say anything that was really damaging. Okay, so let's talk about it. Now, when we first walked into the courtroom, they were talking about some things that were issues that they wanted to address. Okay, first things first, the judge said that basically they're going to have to explain to the jurors, you know, basically what the RICO is, how you arrive at a RICO and all of that, which we knew, and I've told you all this before, because they don't want them to be confused. Because just like there's people online saying that they don't see the RICO, they only see the DV and all of that stuff, some of the jurors may be thinking the same thing, right? Hopefully not, but they may be. Okay, so first of all said, there was a discrepancy about One Stop, the rug dealer. Okay, the defense wanted something about One Stop stricken from the record, I believe it was, and then the judge basically, they objected to it, and the judge basically denied the objection because he said Mr. Combs actually identified the phone number as having belonged to the rug dealer named One Stop. So the court would provide the jury, okay, well, that was what they said. Diddy basically had admitted in the text messages that the phone number was for the rug dealer One Stop. But then the judge said court will provide the jury with its proposed jury charge today. Okay, so basically the jury is going to have an idea of when they're going to be sent to deliberate. Now, mind you, we only have 2 more witnesses for the prosecution. Those are the summary witnesses. And then we have the defense. They claim they have 3 witnesses. 2 are former employees of Diddy. And then the other is going to be the forensic psychiatrist. Now, the judge said that a RICO charge is complicated. So we'll try to simplify it, especially as it pertains to the number of predicate acts. Okay? And there's one dispute, and that is the rug with a D predicate. Okay, so basically then they talked about Brendan Paul coming in. Okay, so Brendan Paul came in and they started asking him to identify certain people. They would put pictures up on the screen and he'd have to say who these people were. He identified Mr. Morin. He identified KK, Jonathan Perez, Frank Lewis, Joey Chavez. Okay, he had to identify all these people. And Fahim Muhammad, of course, and he talked about Fahim being the security and how they called him Fa. Okay, basically J9. Okay, they mentioned J9 a few times. He had identified J9, also known as James. Okay, so then they started talking about him. Okay, they said basically, you know, you started working for Mr. Combs. He said yes, he started working for him. He was making $75,000 a year to start. Then he got a raise to $100,000. Now listen, everybody was making more money than Capricorn Clark. And you know, some people were saying, well, maybe she wasn't qualified. But Brendan was only like, what, 22 or 23 years old when he got the position. So how could he have been more qualified than she was, as far as I'm concerned? She said she was making $65,000, had $80,000 in overtime that she never got. Brendan started off with $75,000. So anyway, he said he was getting paid bi-weekly. And they pulled up one of his pay stubs, I guess, from January of 2024, and it showed that his bi-weekly amount was $4,166.67. Now, they then showed a picture of a bathroom that belonged to Diddy, and they asked Brendan, where was this bathroom located? He said it was not the main bathroom, but it was the bathroom adjacent to the main bedroom in the LA, or in the Miami home. Okay, and Brendan said that he would travel with Diddy, okay, and he also would make advances. He had to advance the locations. Now, if you remember previously, one of the assistants testified to the fact that they had to advance the locations. Like, so basically, when Diddy was having these freak-offs, Wild King nights, hotel nights, whatever you want to call them, he would have one of his assistants go and set things up before he even got there. You know, they take the Astroglide, the Johnson & Johnson's baby oil, the lights, the candles, and all of those things, and set everything up. Okay, so he'd have all of his favorite snacks and all those things. So then, he talked about Jessica Louise. Now, that's the travel agent, okay? And he talked about, they asked him about Diddy getting these club appearances. and basically how much Diddy was getting paid for this. Now, Brendan said that when Diddy would have these club appearances, he was getting like usually like $150,000. Okay, and this wasn't often that he was doing these club appearances, but when he was doing them, that's how much money he would get. Okay, so the family sometimes went for 3 days. Hold on. Oh, and then I think they were trying to insinuate or imply or get the jurors to see or think that Brandon was one of the people that was possibly having forced labor on him, because they asked him something about working for 3 days without, getting any sleep. Said he had worked for like 3 days straight without getting any sleep. Now, and they said you were trying to keep Mr. Combs happy. And so basically, this is when they were working on the Love album, Off the Grid. There was a point in time where Diddy was upset because things weren't going well. He didn't like the way the album was turning out. He felt like people weren't doing their job. And this was all revealed in text messages. So Brendan basically said that he was working on this for 3 days or whatever. And they asked him at one point, they said you wanted to do this. This is what Mr. Steele asked him on the cross-examination. He said, but you wanted to do this, right? And he said, well, I wouldn't say I wanted to, because who the hell wants to stay up for 3 days, right? But then Mr. Steele, fixed it up and was like, well, all of you were working, Mr. Combs too, you all were working trying to get the album done and all of that. So anyway, everybody please like and share. That's right, let's keep the comments respectful. If anybody's disrespectful, Dan, you know what to do, okay? Now, with that all being said, he also had to identify Mr. Philip Pines, who was also one of Diddy's assistants. And then he says, how did you and other assistants get Diddy's rugs with a D? How did you get those? And he said they would get them from Guido or One Stop. Now, Guido and One Stop were the plugs, okay? So then they showed a picture of Guido, and they asked him, hold on. They asked him where they were getting all this stuff from. They were getting it from Guido and One Stop, and asked him what kind of rugs they were getting. And he talked about the ketamine, the Tucci, the Mary Jane. He said it started off with just Mary Jane, but then soon there was other things being added. Okay, all of these other rugs. And basically, this would be when they would have those Wild King nights. Okay, and then he asked him, did he know Jane Doe? And he said yes. And then he asked him about KK. Now, he also asked him what was his role when they had these Wild King nights, or after it was over with. He said he would have to clean up the hotel later. Okay, he would have to clean up the hotel later and then make sure everything was taken out of the room. Make sure the towels were cleaned up and everything. And they actually showed a picture of one of those rooms, and he took the picture. Brendan took it, and they asked him why he took the picture. He said he actually took it because he wanted to show it to Jessica so she would know that there's likely going to be some damage. When I tell you, honey, they had towels spread out all over the floor. Okay, like towels just spread out over the floor, towels on the sofas, just towels. Remember somebody testified, said they had towels just everywhere, covering everything, because they're going to have all that oil and stuff just squirted everywhere. It was all just nasty and a whole hot mess. And he had to clean that up. And so they asked him, why did he wear gloves when he cleaned up after this? And he said, for safety reasons. Like, please, was that even a question? Who wants to go in there with bodily fluids, okay, and all kinds of nasty filth, and you have to clean this stuff up after people been in there getting their freak on? Okay, so anyway, and then he said he told her he knew there would be damages. Okay, he also talked about bringing the baby oil there, the Astroglide, said he purchased rugs, okay, more than marijuana, and sometimes he had to pay for these rugs. Okay, sometimes he had to pay for these things, and he was repaid, but he said sometimes it took a minute for him to get his repayment back, to get his money. Okay, so it often took a while to receive the payments. Okay, then they showed a picture of Diddy, Brendan Paul, and KK on a private jet. And they were all looking spooked on the picture. So I'm like, who took that picture? Because they were all looking very concerned. That picture had to have been taken on the day of the arrest. On the day when Diddy's houses were raided, and then Brendan was arrested. That's obviously when they took that picture, because they were all looking spooked. Like, they're sitting up there like, it was real interesting. So anyway, he said that day they were on their way to the Bahamas on a private jet that wasn't Diddy's. Okay, and this was right before he was arrested. They said, why did you have the rugs why did you have the rugs on you that day, Mr. Paul? Oh, hey, beloved, how you doing?
Okay, love you.
It's good to see you. Love you
Like
too.
the video. Like all y'all in here ain't like the video. Y'all selfish. Selfish.
Thank you, beloved. That's right. Hit the like button, guys. Now, so with that all being said, they were saying that this was the day that Mr. Paul was arrested. They asked him, why did he have the rugs on him? Okay, because here's the thing. He forgot he had this stuff on him. Now, mind you, he didn't have a whole lot. He had like 7 grams, but he had forgotten it was in his bag. Okay, so when the cops told him they wanted to search his bag, he just gave it to him. When they pulled out those rugs, his face was cracked, okay, because he had forgotten it was even in there. Now, they said, did you tell the cops it wasn't yours? And he said no. Now, that really surprised me because Brendan, being the clean-cut, young man that he is, having gone to college and all of that stuff, going to private school, I would have thought when they asked him about those rugs that he would have said, oh, these aren't mine, these belong to Mr. Combs. But he didn't do that. He didn't snitch. He basically took the rap, okay? And they asked him, why didn't he say that they belonged to Diddy? And he said, because out of loyalty, okay? I want y'all to pay attention. He said because out of loyalty, he didn't say anything. Okay, so then he eventually got charged, okay? But then his charges were dropped. And he said and people kind of laughed or snickered a little bit because he said his charges got dropped because he had a good lawyer, okay? He had a good lawyer, and he had one of the best in the country. Now, so they didn't have a lot of questions for him, which I was kind of shocked because I thought the prosecution was going to have a whole lot more questions for Mr. Brendan Paul, but they didn't. Now then, Brian Steele conducted the cross-examination. Just anticipated said loyalty or scared. No, I absolutely think it was loyalty. After hearing the entirety of his testimony, he was absolutely being loyal. I don't think he was scared at all, at least not of Diddy. I don't think he was scared at all. I believe that it was loyalty because after his entire testimony, the cross-examination, all that, it said to me that this young man liked Diddy and that he really was not trying to bury Diddy like I thought that he would do when he got on the stand. I kept telling you all, I can't wait to hear what he's going to say. This is going to put the nail in Diddy's coffin. It didn't, but let's continue. So now upon the cross-examination, which was conducted by Brian Steele gets up there and he says, you work extremely hard and you set goals and you carry them out, right? Is that fair to say? And he says, yes, 100%. Brian says, you do your best. And he says, well, that's how I was raised. So then Steele says, you study hard and work hard. That's true? He says, yes. He says, you wanted to work in the music industry. And he says, yes, the music and entertainment industry. He says, though you were told that you'd miss your girlfriend and your family, you still wanted to pursue it. Because he had mentioned earlier when he was talking to the prosecution that when he wanted to set his sights on coming, to work in the industry, he said someone told him that it's going to be like rigorous work. Forget about having a girlfriend. You might as well break up with her. You won't get to see your family. Like everything about your life is now going to be focused on this. And he was willing to do that because this is how bad he wanted it. So he wasn't discouraged when they told him that. So then Brian Steele says, even though you were told you would miss your family and your girlfriend, you still wanted to pursue it. And he says, true. Steele says, you were how old in 2022? And he says 23. I think he said 23. Okay, Brian Steele says, and you were making $75,000 a year. He says, yes. Steele says, you worked approximately 80 to 100 hours per week. He says, yes. Steele says, you were not a rug mule, were you? And he says, no. And then the prosecution objects. Judge says overruled. Well, actually, the judge says overruled before he answers the question, of course. And then he answers it and says no. So Brian Steele says, now, you remember the prosecution asked you about you carrying rugs for Mr. Combs. He said, now you said on about 10 occasions you carried things for Mr. Combs, right? He says, yes. The prosecutors asked you all these questions about rugs, right? The prosecution then objects, okay? It was overruled. And then he says, yes. He says, but you were not taking rugs, just taking rugs all the time or whatever, like big amounts. And then, of course, they objected again, and the judge this time sustained it. So then he had to rephrase it. So he asked him then, he says, to your knowledge, what's a rug mule? And to which Brendan replies, someone who traffics rugs around the world. Like large amounts of rugs all around the world. So, and that was smart for Brian Steele to ask him to specify that, okay? Because some people in the jury may not have known exactly what is considered a rug mule or what he thought in his own mind what it is. Okay, so anyway, then Steele says, the rugs you carried were for Mr. Combs' personal use. And he says yes. Because remember, the prosecution has tried to paint the picture that Diddy had him carrying these rugs all around, you know, places they were going across state lines out of the country to give to people. But Steele asked him, he said this was for Mr. Combs' personal use. And he says yes. Okay, he said, he asked you if they were, he says, Mr. Combs asked you once if they were good. And was that the only time that you know of Mr. Combs asking anyone to try rugs? Is that fair to say? Is that right? And then he says, right. He says, then, did KK use rugs to your knowledge? To which he says, no. And then he says, Mr. Paul, you wouldn't work. No, he says, Mr. Paul, your family is very important to you, right? And he says, yes, more important than anything. He says, and in fact, you represent your family, and you wouldn't want to disappoint them, would you? And he says, no. He says, you wouldn't work for a criminal, would you? And then there's an objection which was sustained. So he says, the day you were arrested, you cleaned up Mr. Combs' room, and you found a bit of rugs, a small amount. And he said, and then Brendan says, yes, 7 grams. He says, so you put it in the bag, and Mr. Combs didn't tell you to do that, did he? And he says, no. He said that day when he had the rugs, Diddy didn't tell him to put it in the bag, which is likely why he didn't tell on Diddy when they found it in his bag. He said he put it in there because he found it when he was cleaning up Diddy's room. So he just took it and threw it in the bag. Now, and forgot it was in there. So he says, Mr. Combs didn't tell you to do that, did he? He said, no, it was an accident. And then Steele says, so when the officers asked to search your bags, you forgot it was in there, right? He says, yes, and my heart just dropped. Poor thing, he was probably scared to death, okay? And then he says, you got one of the best lawyers in the country, and he's here with you today, right? And Brenda says, yes. He said, now that case was dismissed, right? You probably had some diversion program. It may not have been extensive, but you had a diversion program. And he says, yes. Now he says, when Mr. Combs had you working for 3 days, remember the 3 days they claimed that they didn't get any sleep? He says, when Mr. Combs had you working for 3 days, everyone was working to finish the album, including Mr. Combs himself, right? He says, yes. He says he wasn't forcing people to work for days. He wasn't making people just work for days at a time, right? And then he said, no. He says, but you wanted to do it, right? And then Brenda says, I don't know if I wanted to do it. Okay, because who the hell wants to work for 3 days straight? I'm sorry, what? So he was like, I don't know if I wanted to do it. And then Steele says, but you were exhilarated and wanted to complete the album. You all did. Do you remember the name of it? And he said, yeah, the Love Album Off the Grid. He said, do you feel indebted to Mr. Combs? And he says, well, how do you mean? Brendan asked him, you know, what do you mean? How are you meaning this? And he says, did you learn a lot while you were there? You know, did he teach you things? And he says, yes. So then, at this point, he says, how do you feel about, he says, sitting here today, how do you feel about Mr. Combs? And he says, it's complicated. That's what he said. He didn't ever, in my opinion, during the entirety of the direct and the cross, he never really said anything bad about Diddy, like I expected him to. I thought he would be angry that he was arrested because of Diddy. I thought that he would be, you know, going in for the prosecution. He didn't. He basically said when he was asked, how do you, sitting here today, how do you feel about Mr. Combs? And he said, it's complicated. And then he says, Brian still asked him, he says, he said, you were given immunity, right? He says, yes. He He said, but you would have told the truth anyway. And then he says, yes. And he says, no further questions. Now, with that all being said, the prosecution was objecting every now and then. And so they got up to redirect. When they got up to redirect, first thing they said was, Mr. Steele asked you if you thought because this is the thing I forgot to tell you guys. Brian Steele asked him, did he think there was anything criminal going on in those hotel rooms when they were having the Wild King nights? And he said no. And then Mr. Steele said, you wouldn't work for a criminal, would you? And he said no. Okay, so then when they get up for the redirect, she says, Mr. Steele, you remember him asking you if you thought anything criminal was happening during Wild King nights? And then he says, yes. She says, do you know what was going on in the hotel rooms during the Wild King nights? Now, I guess she thought he was going to say no, he didn't know what was going on. But he said, yeah, sex and partying. That's what he said, sex and partying. So then she says, were you there? He said no. So she says, what do you think the money that you gave Mr. Combs? And remind the jurors how much money you gave Mr. Combs. And he said $5,000. She said, what did you think the money that you gave Mr. Combs was for? Okay? And so he didn't really know what the money was for, I guess. But she said, you were the one who put things together for the Wild King nights. And what did you do when you were putting things together? He said he got the candles, the incense, toiletries, lights, the baby oil, the Astroglide. And then when he couldn't do it, she said, who would do it? He said other assistants. Okay, other assistants would do it. And also he would clean up the hotel. And she said when you cleaned up the hotel, before the hotel workers came in, you said that you would leave cash tips for them. Is that right? For the hotel workers. And he said, yes. She said, did Mr. Combs give you the money to pay the hotel workers and give them tips? And he said, no. That money was my money. It came out of my pocket. So she said, you provide Mr. Combs with that type of money. Did you provide Mr. Combs with that type of money on other times? Like the $5,000 he gave Diddy when they were having the hotel nights? And he said, not to my recollection, or not that I can recall. He couldn't recall, according to him, giving Diddy that type of money on any other times or occasions. So she said, you remember Mr. Steele asking you if you'd work for a criminal? And he says, yes. She says, now the last time that you saw Mr. Combs, what happened that day? And he said, I was arrested. Now when she said that, or when he gave that answer, she asked that question, that was pure gold right there. I have to give it to her. That was pure gold right there, because she said, remember Mr. Steele asking you, you wouldn't work for a criminal, would you? And he said, yes. And then she said, and the last time you saw Mr. Combs, what happened? He said, I was arrested. So isn't that crazy? Like, she really ate on that, okay? So with that all being said, she said, sitting here today, how do you feel about Mr. Combs? And he said, it's complicated. So I'm telling you, I really thought that he did a good job. I thought that mic drop moment, says Marie. Yes. A mule is a mule is a mule, says Aqua Girl Rising. Well, here's the thing. He really wasn't a mule. He really wasn't a mule, according to him. He only carried small amounts, like 7 grams. 7 grams is clearly for personal use. Mules carry, like he said on the stand, mules are carrying illegal substances from one place to another to sell to somebody, or to, to drop off and pick up money or whatever. Taking them to different places. Okay? So he said that he's not what you would consider a mule. And I believe him. Okay, so with that all being said, then they brought up some exhibits. Now these exhibits were text messages between Diddy and Cassie. And Diddy's always talking motivational. The first text message they read was where Diddy was saying, we control our own energy, stay in the light. And then he was complaining about the album not going the way he wanted it. In one of the text exchanges, he said, the presentation's not done, the album's not done, okay? The production's not done. He was like, this is just weak. It's whack. So then KK says, well, I'll call Frank again. Diddy said, whatever, what's the plan? So he's annoyed. So KK says, the assistant can make sure not to drop the ball and they'll stay out of your way. Diddy said, yeah, okay, well, call John, not Frank. So he said, then Diddy says, John or Brendan, they can make the call faster. And then they play an audio of Diddy talking, and Diddy says, thought you didn't want Brendan doing it. And then KK says, I don't, but right now he's at the house. How fast are you moving? And then there's more audio, and Diddy says, yeah, have Jonathan do it. So when KK says, okay, she says, okay, John will go to the hotel. Diddy says, I need John to go to her now, please. Please now. He should have been left. Now, when he's getting frantic and saying all of this is clearly when he's trying to get somebody to go see Cassie. Okay, he's trying to get somebody to go talk to Cassie because Cassie's ticked off, because he's going upside her head. Now, they showed on the screen a picture of Cassie and Diddy at the Met Gala, and apparently they got into it right after the Met Gala or sometime during. So that's what the conversation was about. This was March 13th of 2017. Diddy says, do you mean, hold on. He says, do you want me to hit Jaron or Big Man? He's asking KK. She says, you can if you want. You only sit in one pick. Okay, so then this is the one between him and Cassie. March 13th of 2017 at 1:59 p.m. Cassie says, what the F? Really? I think it'll always be black and white. You threw out all my shish, and I can get it. Now I didn't bust you in the head. She says, now I didn't bust you in the head, because clearly he busted her in hers. So Diddy says, you're crazy. Let's stop talking. You flipping out on me for nothing. Cassie says, I can come back, but you know I fight. Thank you, Big Elvis, for your contribution to the channel, beloved. I appreciate you. Peace, love, and blessings. So Cassie says, I can come back, but you know I fight. And Diddy's like, fight who? Cassie says, I just don't want to be beat down. Diddy says, I really think you can make my... Now, this is what Diddy told Cassie. Now, this is kind of explicit, so I'm going to have to try to modify the way I say it. Diddy says, you really think you can make me jerk my D for 10 hours and not come? I've got to get this nut out of my D. This is what Diddy says. Oh, nasty, dirty freak. First of all, who is choking their chicken for 10 hours? Okay, I have several questions. He didn't get calluses on his hand. So anyway, that's what he said. He said, I got to get this nut out of my D. So Cassie says, you hit me in the head 2 good times. Diddy says, you know what? You are so disrespectful. I'm tired of this shish. You think I'm one of your little F boys. This is what he's telling Cassie. And then he puts F-R-I-O. I don't know what that means. If you all do, help me out. Because clearly that's an abbreviation for something. So then Cassie says, you're at the point where you want to party, but I have to focus. Okay? I knew if I said no in New York, it would be a problem. You treat me like a hooker. This hooker has been here for 10 years. Diddy's like, wow. Cassie says, that was you. You hurt me so bad. I never meant to disrespect you. All I wanted was to have a good time. But you took things out on me. I'm a good person. I try to be nice and treat you good. I've been crying all night and can't sleep. I love you. And it's a shame you don't even see that. I love you so much you don't even see it. I was scared of your rage. She says, I know I talk out of line sometimes, but I'm just so in love with you. Boris had to tackle you, Puff. That's not love, that's possession. Now, he was beating the crap out of her so much so that someone had to tackle this fool to get him off of her. You broke my heart this time. The owner said we couldn't have people over. And then Diddy says, I want my woman to be appreciative. See, you're a different type of chick. You did me effed up. If I would have did that for any other girl, she'd be so happy. Nah, but not you. That's what he's telling Cassie. She'd have cried all night. He has no empathy. Only being self-serving and worried about himself and how he feels and how he didn't get what he wants. Then Cassie says, I didn't ask you to take me to the Met. Talking about the Met Gala. I asked you to have my record come out after 1,000,000 years. No one deserves being dragged by their hair. I locked the door for my safety. So at that point, they sent us out here to break. And here's the interesting thing. Right before we went to break, basically, are you leaving? Huh? You going back up? Okay, I'll be up in a second. I'm almost done. So right before we went to break, Teeny Garrigo stood up and said that she had a 106 objection. Because what she said was, while they're reading all these text messages, these exchanges, putting them on exhibit, she said that they didn't read the whole thing. And she feels like it's prejudicial because the part that they left out was where Diddy or Cassie said, I love our FOs when we both want it. And she's like, they need to read that after summary. So they need to put that up there, okay? By this time, the jury's gone. And so Teeny's arguing that, y'all need to read the whole thing. Because they're saying they're reading this part, but they're not talking about the part where Cassie actually said, I love the FOs. I love our FOs when we both want it. So, but here's the thing. Even if she agreed to have the FOs 1,000 times, on the 1,001 time that she says she doesn't want to have it, well, she shouldn't have to have it because that's now force, fraud, and coercion. May not be fraud, but that's force and coercion, okay? Thank you, Sheila, for your contribution to the channel, beloved. I appreciate you. Peace, love, and blessings. So I'm going to get back in here because the break is clearly over, but I will be back after we leave at 1 o'clock to give you all the rest of the tea. Okay, so I love you all to life. Each one teach one. That's how we grow and thrive. Do something productive, constructive, but never destructive. And always remember, beloveds, to keep the Most High first in your lives. Peace.